From the most trusted names in local news, KDPG.
Good morning and welcome to the KDPG Sunday edition. I'm Stacy Smith. Natural gas is a big part of southwestern Pennsylvania's economy. Natural gas reserves in southwestern Pennsylvania are considered world-class, with the potential for thousands of new jobs in construction and drilling. Companies like Chevron and Peoples Gas are leading the way in employment in the area. But industry leaders are also voicing concerns about regulations in the state and the threat of a state extraction tax. Now, some legislators and Governor Tom Wolf believe that the extraction tax is necessary to help address budget needs. This morning on the KDPG Sunday edition, the state of the energy industry in Pennsylvania and the Pittsburgh region. And we welcome two guests to the program. Stacy Olson is president of Chevron Appalachia, and Dennis Yablonsky is chief executive officer of D.Y. Yablonsky Consulting. He retired this past year as the CEO of the Allegheny Conference on Community Development. David Shribman, the executive editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joins us for this morning's discussion. I want to welcome both of you this morning to the KDPG Sunday edition.
Thank you.
Kind of a basic here. We say how important natural gas production is here in western Pennsylvania, and we're going to get into how big you think it could be. Could it be as big as the steel industry was in southwestern Pennsylvania at one point?
I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. Part of the reason that we're here, and thanks for having us this morning, is this Forge the Future study was really based on that exact question. What is the full potential of this natural gas resource that you have in this region? Many people don't realize, but you're sitting on one of the second largest oil fields in the entire world. So when Chevron and Peoples Gas got together to answer that exact question, we teamed up with McKinsey and their global consultants, and they came and we tried to quantify the full potential. And what they estimate is that there is the potential for $60 billion of GDP growth, perhaps 100,000 family-sustaining jobs, $3 to $4 billion a year of additional tax revenue. And it can underpin tremendous growth in the region.
Well, what's the timetable on something like that?
Well, that's also part of the study is around the strategies and the fact that probably the region is a bit behind in implementing strategies to fully capitalize on this potential, because as many of y'all know, the production rate of natural gas has been growing tremendously over the last 10 years. You broke a record last year of gas production from this region. You're going to break another record. And so the time to act is really now to put these strategies and policies in place that can better fuel the economic growth and the full potential of that huge resource for the region.
Before we'll go any further, I just want to acknowledge this is a historic moment in the history of the KDPG Sunday edition. Two Stacys on one show, kind of a stereo Stacy here. So
yeah, you like that.
It's really terrific, yeah. But
I play the bass part, and she.
Okay, well, to this Stacy, I would ask, what kinds of strategies are required?
So the first phase of Forge the Future laid out really three main strategies to pursue, and those were how do you build and incentivize economic clusters of industries that would benefit from a low-cost gas supply? How do you also enable infrastructure to get more of the gas to larger markets? And so those were the key strategies that came out of the first phase. And maybe I'll let Dennis talk a little bit about in the second phase. On the second phase of the effort, we really tried to expand the input from the business community. We brought in the PA Chamber, the Philly Chamber, the Pennsylvania Manufacturing Association. And the phase two really lays out some actions and some strategies that we're now starting to talk about and action on.
Dennis, I want to ask you this. In your Forge the Future campaign brochure here, it talks about basically, and Stacy alluded to this, southwestern Pennsylvania and the state itself being behind the times, and as far as gross domestic product, I mean, how much money is generated here. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, one of the elements of this study that McKinsey did was they looked at the overall economic performance of the state, not just on energy, but overall. Right. And as the report highlights, there have been some areas where we are behind some of our competitive states. And that's part of the rationale for why this report calls for making energy a higher priority as a state economic development sector. And by the way, all these numbers and recommendations are for the state of Pennsylvania exclusively, not for the southwestern region, including Ohio and West Virginia. And what it found, as Stacy mentioned, is the potential impact is significant on jobs, on GDP, on state tax revenue. And the way to do it is make energy a priority, invest in infrastructure, review the tax and regulatory environment, make sure it's competitive, and then invest in workforce development. And that's maybe the most important thing for the viewers is there's a lot of jobs in this industry that are going unfilled because we don't have the right match between skills and needs. And there's a big opportunity for Western Pennsylvania.
Well, I found it interesting, and we're talking about, first of all, the gross domestic product, according to your research here, that in 2016, the U.S. GDP was 2.3, and Pennsylvania's was 0.1%. As far as that, how much?
$720 billion to be exact.
Yeah,
is the state GDP.
And you say that there is a decline in the workforce as opposed to Pennsylvania growing. I mean, according to your statistics here,
yes,
decline continues to be driven primarily by a shrinking labor force. And since June of 2017, the state's labor force declined by 61,000 people.
That's due to, by the way, at a macro level, that's due to a couple of factors. One is retiring baby boomers. I mean, just in southwestern Pennsylvania, in the 10 counties, 290,000 people that currently work will retire over the next 10 years, just here. And then the other thing is people are...
not Stacy.
Yes, but not Stacy.
Right. So where I'm going with this is that what you believe that if more is done as far as harvesting and supplying natural gas from not only the Pittsburgh or southwestern Pennsylvania region, but across the state, that you'll see an influx of jobs and more money being generated in the state. Is that
exactly?
Is that the bottom line?
Yeah.
And more money for your company too.
Well, who's against this? I mean, what's the opposition here? This is a PR campaign against what?
Well, you know, what we've found is actually the awareness of this competitive advantage and the size of the resource that you're sitting on is not really as high as it could be. And that's when Dennis said, yeah, make energy and energy strategy part of the economic development here. We hope to, through this study, really just raise awareness and quantify the potential of making energy a priority. And that's really an important first step.
So is Western Pennsylvania, and by extension Pennsylvania, about to have the potential to become, say, Texas in the 30s? That's a bad decade. Texas in the 20s?
You have I can't comment on Texas in the 20s, but you have the potential to see tremendous economic growth if you can put some strategies in place to attract more business, to attract companies that will want to come here to leverage your huge low-cost
But so far this is all mumbo jumbo. What are these strategies?
Well, the strategies at a high level are defined. What needs to happen now is the nuts and bolts and getting people to really mobilize to take action. So we can talk about, and McKinsey has helped define what needs to happen, but really the action and the attention is what we find is missing at the government level and the policy level.
Let me give you a couple of examples that are in the report. So for example, there's 500,000 homes in Pennsylvania that could benefit from having gas as their heating source versus oil or other sources. The average Pennsylvanian who has gas heating has saved $1,200 a year since this resource has been put in place. So one of the strategies, how do we get more infrastructure, particularly in rural areas where people can get access to gas? So that's one strategy. Another strategy is on the petrochemical side. We have an opportunity after the Shell plant to have more of those kinds of facilities here with the jobs and the impact that goes along with it, but we need sites to be prepared. We don't have sites that are ready to go with all the right characteristics. That's another example of a strategy that's called out specifically in the report.
Well, go ahead. No, go ahead. No. I was just going to say that you have companies now extracting gas, and you have pipelines. I mean, so what's the issue? If I were to sit back and say, well, you know, everybody, you're making gas now.
Well, the issue is the region is not benefiting as much as it could because a lot of the gas, you're right, the production is growing from this region, but your regional demand is staying relatively flat. Dennis just mentioned an example where you could use more of it locally if you could heat more homes. And so a lot of it is being, is leaving the region, it's being exported. You're just not seeing the full potential because you could be using the resource to attract business, which would fuel more jobs, more GDP, more tax revenue, and help with some of the struggles that Pennsylvania and the region have seen.
What kind of business are you talking you would attract by this?
Well, you would attract advanced manufacturing, data centers, petrochemicals.
Just because that there's a lower price for their gas?
Yes.
Is that the reason?
Because I mean they consume and use a ton of gas to drive their manufacturing factories, et cetera. So if they can choose to go to a city where that fuel source is cheaper, then that can be used to attract business here. And
so, Dennis, in your last position, you'd be in the position to know. Are there companies who didn't come here because there wasn't enough natural gas? That sounds preposterous.
Well, there's two types of companies that would be attracted to this. There's companies that use gas to power their manufacturing facilities. Right. Okay, and that's one. And having a low-cost, predictable source of gas is an advantage, particularly if energy costs are a big part of your cost structure. The second are companies that use gas as a feedstock, i.e., that's the beginning of the manufacturing process. That's Shell as an example of that. And there are a bunch of other companies in that same sector that we think will look more seriously at southwestern Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania as a whole as a result of both the dry gas and the wet gas being here.
You know, I noticed here, and it wasn't a coincidence, that the Sierra Club or the other environmental groups were not part of the study. And of course, this isn't a suicide document. But say they were here, what would they say about this? Say, what would the Sierra Club say, or the Conservation League or anything like that say about all this?
Well, yeah, if you care about the environment, which I certainly do, and I know Chevron does, and we all do, you should be very supportive of the growth of natural gas. Natural gas can provide a really strong bridge to a less carbon-intensive fuel in the environment. The U.S. right now is reducing their carbon emissions at a rate greater than any country in the world. A lot of that is because of the rise of natural gas. So there is no doubt that, yeah, you can coexist and have a cleaner, safer environment and see the rise in natural gas production. The carbon reduction that we've seen in the U.S. has been quite significant, and it's really from the rise of natural gas.
All right, we will continue our discussion on the KDPG Sunday Edition in just a moment.